all taken care of, and we got big guy all taken care of.
Guys definitely need this.
Yeah, they do. The guys are okay.
Someone has their sound on.
Oh, dear.
I was walking down the hill.
I was just maybe, oh, you're right.
Last year when I did.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Harley's going by.
We're live.
We stopped, he said, give me the ride.
Oh.
Really?
If your sound is.
Are you logged in?
No.
Oh, then no.
No, it's not you. Person on the iPad, could you please change iPad to your name?
Gee, it might be, it sounds like it's coming from here.
Yes, we made it up.
That's what she, but if the speakers are. Perhaps will be. Yeah, yeah. It's okay.
I've done that twice today.
Check, oh, I think you gotta, no, the.
Yeah.
There we go, just. Okay.
No, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, we're live. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and it is spending the day talking about the 3-acre rule and for stormwater. And we are joined by a lot of folks who are living with where we're at right now, and I'm eager to hear from everyone. So we're just gonna run straight down the list. We do have a bill that we are looking at. It's H 481. Which is on the website. So would welcome anything folks have to say. So we're gonna start with Mr. I. Okay, there's no thank you.
How are you? Well, good to see you. Let me introduce myself. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like we should do a round of introductions ourselves so that you all know who is here, and then we'll get started.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
I'm Terry Williams from Welcome District.
And Watson from the Washington District.
Seth Longworth for the Bennington South District. Let's go back down my end. Thank you. It's too bad. So I know your opinion.
Uh-oh. We'll have to talk.
I already said I can talk for a living. I'm Robert I am a resident of Rutland City right now. I formerly was I am an 8th generation Vermonter and a long-time resident of Caledonia County. Previously in my life, I had the same license plate that Senator Beck has now. After I did that, I was commissioner of motor vehicles, then I retired and went to Rutland, be close to an adult child. And excuse me if I'm going fast, but my battery is not quite where it should be. So would you like me to get into my prepared remarks?
Oh, that would be great.
And questions are great.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Watson. I'm sure that you and Senator Williams and Senator Beck are thrilled that you finally got a schedule. So that like a third grader, I will no longer sit there saying, call on me, call on me. I have your attention. I do want to say last session's chairman never acknowledged my requests to speak. And I think our story is we were early in the process, which I will tell you. I just regret that because somebody should have been here long for him. I'm president of the Country Grove Homeowners Association. We're a 43 unit condo community in Rutland City. We have about 20 buildings on our 15-acre property. Some of the units, some of the buildings have 4 units, some have 2, some have 3, and we have 4 or 5 standalone houses as well. We also had the first expiring permit under the former system. So we were in the game early, and we entered this process determined to receive our permit, to help ANR build the system, and to comply with the effort and prove it was possible to succeed. Our community is comprised of mostly retired persons. We do not have age restrictions in our covenants. We have married couples, we have single older women, we have single older men. We are mostly retired, but we do still have a few residents who are in the workforce. I only point this out to make you aware that costs have consequences. While we might have a few owners who can afford to absorb the additional expense, That is not true of all our owners. We are all Vermonters and we all have budgets. And when I speak to a fee increase to our community, I hear the range of just send me to the bill to I need to think about my ability to stay here. And it's my job as president of the association to thread that needle. I and the other board members are strictly volunteers. We are not paid staff. And I'm sure we did not realize our retirement with commitment would be spent running this type of a show. But we tried to comply. We invested our time testing the ANR early online application system. We invested our monies, about $20,000. We've had 2 consulting engineers. And today we have nothing to show for our efforts except an email from the ANR professional this week asking for more information from our engineer. Special recognition goes to Dr. Mark Fox, who I noticed on the board is the secretary and a board member, and he is wonderful for me in that sometimes he calms me down, and that's a good idea. Dr. Fox is a retired Castleton State professor who worked many hours with me on this project, and we just want you to know that so far we have failed. The saddest part of our story is that our intent was always to succeed and to prove to others it was possible to get through this process. Part of my background as a State Department commissioner, when I was at DMV, was to make sure our systems work. And you have to be open to does it work or does it, and how can we make it better? While I would be first to admit that my efforts there did not always work right, and that is a regret, this effort is a colossal waste of numerous unintended consequences. It is not my intent to focus on our particular project. I would ask that you think about the desired outcomes. We, Country Grove, we are not polluting Lake Champlain. Our property abuts East Creek, which flows into Otter Creek, which goes a long ways to Lake Champlain. And our 15-acre property is not a problem. And I think I speak for many when I say it doesn't feel like we're the problem. Any money spent by Country Grove or reimbursed to us by the state is just wasted. The available monies need to target real polluters, not properties which meet an arbitrary 3-acre profile. The program needs definitive targets. 3 acres is not the right matrix. Just let me have this, imagine this scenario. Some one of us owns a 2-acre parcel in our community, and we want to develop that as a recreational opportunity for the entire town. We want to have all the attributes. We want to have tennis courts that are covered. We want to have a swimming pool. We want to have a riding stable. We want to have a gymnasium. And in the middle of that 200 acres, we now have, with our parking lots, 3 acres of impervious surfaces. Just imagine that. I challenge each of you to determine how the runoff at this imaginary property's boundaries would change, whether there is development there or not. I don't think you can measure it. That certainly is our case, is we can't measure anything. So we have approximately 15 acres and just over 3 is identified. And during questions, if one of you would like to ask me about our acreage determination, it's a neat little story. It stays with me, obviously. Any program design needs to identify a ratio of total acres in the property to the impervious surface. I would be the first to admit that if someone had 3.5 acres and they had 3.4 acres of roof, they have probably an issue. If you have 15 acres and you have 3 acres of roof and you have a hard time collecting the water, you don't have an issue. And there ought to be an exit ramp for that. Incorporated in our property was properly permitted under Act 250 and built starting in the 1980s when I hadn't even been elected to the legislature, to say nothing of any of the others. This is an older property, and it was incorporated in the design of numerous small swales and numerous small retention areas, and they were all properly built. And if any of you want to go out for a walk after it rains and we wear our sneakers, I guarantee I can make them wet, because I can put you through those areas that are doing exactly what they were intended to do. We do not have noticeable streams running to the edge of our property. We have 2 drainage areas. We have some areas that are rock lined, but even before you get to East Creek, there are additional catchment areas. I've never seen liquid precipitation making it all the way from our property to East Creek. It obviously goes into the ground somewhere. We could gutter our buildings, that's one of the solutions, and it's more difficult for us because we're not in a single business building. And we could collect that participation and we could pipe it into the city system, we already have city sewer. Rutland city system, like virtually every other in the state of Vermont, is old. It is up to capacity, and us putting more rainwater into the city system does not solve the problem. If anything, it only compounds the problem. So I would say to you, that's not really a reasonable outcome. In the bill before you, I've asked that your study committee, you consider adding a person or persons with expertise and experience in trying to navigate these waters. My experience here, I've watched a lot of committees be formed, and generally people who are in the State House on a daily basis have a way of subtly communicating, our group needs to be there, our group needs to be there. Well, pretty soon all the groups are there, except for the citizens that are out there trying to do it. You need to have a civil engineer that's tried to work through this, and I would say there was no training for those civil engineers as they tried to guide property owners such as us through the system. So anyway, the committee design needs to lead toward players with notable credentials, except dealing with today's, the committee as it's now designed seems to deal towards players with notable credentials, except dealing with today's mandate. Inside the Beltway thinking is not the primary attribute here. And in my Senate days, I sat in on some meetings with the committee on committees and trying to establish good committees. And you need a lot of people at the table whose necessary background or different. Their backgrounds are different. And right now that committee, I think, has a noticeable void in it. I would be remiss not to mention the efforts of the AMR staff, who were learning just as we were learning. I appreciate the situation which they found themselves in. Greater effort should be spent asking those professional staff members how this how a new implementation would work and where are the lessons that need to be learned. There are tons and tons of lessons, and I know you're going to hear some more stories after me. Lastly, I tread on this with some trepidation. I think the effort is improperly named. This is not about stormwater. This is not about Tropical Storm Irene. This is not about storms that we have seen more recently where there's incredible flooding. This is about precipitation. Precipitation from the sky is various forms, which have been coming since the beginning of time. It's about rain, it's about hail, it's about snow, it's about sleet. And this isn't new, but it's not stormwater that we're talking about. We're talking about the precipitation that has always been part of the world. Thank you for including me and allowing someone with firsthand experience in attempting to remain an honest citizen. And Dr. Fox and I will tell you, we've spent a lot of time trying to be honest citizens. I would encourage you to do whatever you can to relieve the unnecessary burden on a lot of property owners and a lot of developments that isn't going to change anything. And I would be the first to admit there are polluters of Lake Champlain, and we ought to target what the target is and go for the target. Anything else is a waste of all our time. Thank you very much. My battery did not run out. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Well, thanks for that testimony of all of your efforts.
We try to work. Mark will tell you, we try to make it.
I believe you, I really do. And it seems to me that if you and Dr. Fox can't do it, then it would be hard for almost anyone to do it.
We think we have some talent. That's
it. Well, I have two questions. You sort of answered, you partially answered one of them, which is, it sounds like the property was permitted before and has a stormwater system of some kind on the property.
It does.
So has that been found to be inadequate, or is it
You
just?
get no credit for that. This is constructed in such a way that if you have something such as we have built in, that's not part of the matrix in filling out the flows. So,
Okay,
so
so you're just, it's like you have
it's
nothing.
a never, it's as if,
Okay.
it's as if we have nothing, yes.
Okay, and then my second question is, and I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but you said you should target the people who are the polluters. Who do you think that is? And
That's
how? How do you think we should do that?
I will tell you that is a political hot potato, but you can't go on Lake Champlain and convince me that it's a small housing development such as ours. And you being from Madison County know darn well what we're talking about. I mean, Aganston wouldn't like us to say it, but a lot of things happen to Lake Champlain that come from the Bronx community. And quite frankly, my livelihood in St. Johnsbury for 26 years was that economy.
Okay.
Go ahead and answer for that.
Nice to finally get to meet you.
Nice to see you again.
And, you know, one of the things we talked about was, you know, I think we've lost the origin of this issue. And I asked the question of DEC when we were there, how did you come up with this list? Did you actually go out, put boots on the ground and we did agree the other day that we probably should look at a priority list. You know, get back out, revisit each one of the properties on the list and,
Yeah,
you know, some people have gone to the extent of resurveying their property and getting all 3 acres.
you know, that sort of touches on the question I wanted somebody to ask, and I want to jump in on it. Yeah, there are a lot of efforts. We got our first letter, and I'm sure it was sent to many people, and it said that we had 3.05 acres of impervious surface. This was done from satellite imaging. Please check our work, please check your map. Mark and I went out, and we took that map and we walked those 15 acres about 20 different ways, and we found out 3 areas in our map that we were thrilled. We got it. We are below 3 acres, we went home feeling great. So we wrote it up, we sent it in, and we got a letter from A&R saying, well, we've looked at the map more closely too, and we think you really have 3.5 acres. Which led me to express, you know, and this shows you how long this is going on. I said to Mark, Tom Brady can't score field goals if the end line's moving, and we can't either. I mean, it was ridiculous, but we stayed with the process. But somehow there has to be an exit ramp for the professionals. And Terry Purcell, who is the Rutland area A&R person that we work very closely with, I hold him in the highest regard, and I know I'm over my 15 minutes, so I'm going to finish. Terry deserves a lot of credit for working with us. And I would not speak for Terry, but I think there are professionals all over the state. If they put feet on property, they would go back to their office and say, we should kick this one off, we're all wasting our time.
Go ahead.
And Rob, I think what you're saying is that the 3 acres is a slab and chamber approach, and what we need is a scalpel approach, and I completely agree.
Yeah, and 3 acres may not be the right number if someone only owns 2.1 acres, but they've got 2 acres of building. But 3 acres of surface and 15 acres of property lead me to believe that this is an energy that is not in this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Really
so much for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate you finally getting here.
Yay.
Now, maybe I can get the mountain for the end of the day. I think retired people have fun. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, all right, and so now we're gonna welcome Johanna Courier. Welcome.
Well, yes, we may actually have some answers to those questions from our experience. We're just homeowners. All right, this is my husband, Richard Courier. He is an engineer. You want an engineer? You've got one in your committee at the moment. All right, he's also been a program manager. I'm an educator, and I would call myself a citizen scientist. And the reason I'm probably still standing is I'd like to turn remarks over to my husband, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
We're equally prepared. We are a team. And do ask your questions again. And if he can't answer them, I can. All right, and they're very good questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. And could you also just say your name again for our rule of?
Yes, I am Richard Courier. I thank you for this opportunity to testify regarding the 3 acre rule. So, yes. You most likely have already heard from the Agency of Natural Resources and Department of Environmental Resources Conservation regarding this, and the towns and cities have also spoken. But what I'm going to try to give you is the perspective from the landowner's side. We live in Berrytown on Valley View Circle. And, the property we live in, the development we live in was known as Maple Ridge Common, that was the name the developer chose. When he incorporated. We don't use that, we call ourselves Valley View Circle. We have 22 houses on 57 acres. We have 5 acres and a impervious surface. The landscaping of our development is such that there are swales and intentional features that cause all the water to basically run off into the grass, into the bushes, into the trees, and eventually into a wetland that's part of our development. We have a maple grove, that we're surrounded by acres of grass. Anyway, and the stormwater management, the implementation manual for the stormwater, tells us that wetlands filter and store sediment nutrients. And we didn't have to be given any credit whatsoever for our existing wetlands. And likewise, we get no credit for our existing features and what they may be accomplishing. The 3-acre rule is designed to remove phosphorus from a light rain, which I hear it described as 1 inch in 24 hours. Does nothing to mitigate heavy rains or stormwater from a flooding. There are 700 3-acre projects in Vermont that impact 8,000 people. You probably already know this. The project on Maple Ridge Common, based on the original plan, was estimated at $1 million. Divide that by 22, and you get 25,000 per person, per household. That's not how I expect to spend my retirement. 700 times a million, $700 million. And these projects come in all shapes and sizes, so that might not even be a ballpark or something. The town of Barry has 7 of these projects, estimated at about $8 million. But the 3-acre rule is simply based on the fact that if you have a stormwater permit and your infrastructure is old, you need a permit. And to do that, you need to comply with what they call the redevelopment criteria. We're not going to need redevelopment. Our development needs a permit. But the guy right next to us who resembles us considerably does not need a permit if they never had a permit. Remember, landowners are not the people that made the money off of these developments, but we're now on the hook to fix the problem. Implementation of the 3-acre rule by the DEC is based on a series of assumptions. Starting with the fact that we have a homeowners association, which we do not. Note that homeowners associations are typically established by the development and become part of the deed when you buy into the project. And not after the fact. Additional assumptions include the homeowners can actually understand regulation. Negotiate the bureaucratic measures and policies. Find a consultant, hire one. Find an engineer, find a contracting company that can build this thing. Negotiate these contracts. And finally be able to pay for this whole thing. Currently, projects are not priorities. Not based on, it should be prioritized based on what the benefit is actually to Lake Champlain as far as removing phosphorus. If you rated my project on that Valley View Circle, you would get a 0 or a 1 on a scale of 0 to 10. And the way things stand now, we're all rated as 10s, so we're all competing for the same money, trying to have the same consultants, the same engineers, the same contractors to do the installation. It just doesn't work. The original plan of Valley View Circle included 7 stormwater features. the plan was based on, soil maps put up by the Department of Agriculture that showed that our soil had poor absorption rates. After the consultant came and actually walked around the property and noted that there was no standing water, it rained the night before. He ordered the requested soil test and discovered that the soil was a lot more absorbent than the map showed. So basing this on the map did not work. You really need to get boots in the ground. So once the directions of the runoff, as assumed by the original plan, and not as actual on when you looked at the surfaces, they did not go in the directions they were assuming. So the revised plan now installs 4 fire retention ponds. 2 to be built on private property. Valley View Circle has no common property. The other 2 are being built on easements that the town holds for maintenance of existing features. But it's difficult for me to believe they can actually construct these actually staying on these easements. It's difficult for me to understand that this extremely expensive project will actually reduce the amount of phosphorus going into Gunner Brook by way of our unmanned tributary. Gunner Brook eventually falls into the Panuski and into Pipeline. The only thing it actually will ever accomplish is produce a check mark on some bureaucratic list that we now comply. And actually, we've been told by the DEC that we're gonna have to form an HOA for the sole purpose of being administratively correct. Okay? Our questions regarding this impact on home values, safety, liability, and maintenance of these features so far go unanswered. The current, and an interesting side, the current permit actually has my home address on it, 107 Valley View Circle. We believe this is because Marcel Roy, who was the developer, actually lives there, and that's the address he used. And we're still trying to get that on fixed. All 3 acre properties are treated as if they're a parking lot that runs directly into the lake. The 2024 Lake Champlain Basin report tells us that the flood of 23 dumped 50% of the 1 year's phosphorus load into the lake in 1 week. A plume of sediment reached halfway across the main lake. We had 2 more floods in 24. During these floods, sewage plants failed and were overwhelmed, dumping raw sewage. Farmers' fields were inundated, sweeping in manure, chemicals. Yes, stations got flooded, houses got flooded, anybody, who knows what's coming. Climate change and Mother Nature have trumped the hypothesis of pretty difficult. It doesn't clean up Lake Champlain when we have problems as huge as this. Possible remedies. One will be prioritize projects. The dual is actually accomplish something first. Apply the trigger rule into your new developments and real redevelopments. Visit the site. Visit the sites to determine whether the information used is actually correct. Visit sites and evaluate what's there to see what it actually does accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. I believe my own advice. Remove the statement that says cost should be not considered. Cost is definitely a factor. Use a cost versus benefit based strategy. Remove what I call best management practices. Susan Rupert used to say good, better, best. Maybe we can only afford good. We need to mitigate the flood problem. I don't have any idea how to do that. Upgrade our storage treatment plants. Some of them are actually apparently being protected from flooding in some way. I read an article about that. And remove landowners' responsibility. We can't do this. The 3 acre rule does not increase lake turnover or circulation. doesn't improve riparian buffers along the state, along streams and lakes, does not address phosphorus, sources of phosphorus as an antique septic system along the lake, or discharge of human waste from boats in the lake. It's a simplistic approach to a very complicated problem. Maple Ridge Common is in the final phases of plan. We're also one of the early one permits that expired. And we might even see the bulldozer disposals as soon as 2025. So we're really hope we'll be able to act swiftly to that practice mess. Thank you very much. We don't want to be the first costly unnecessary project. Questions?
Thank you so much. I do have one question. I just wanted to, again, get for the record. So you, the project, at Valley View is, what's the total cost of it?
The original estimate was based on a preliminary plan that came in at $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
It was looked at by a person who did that kind of work. And it was just off the top of his head, but the new project I have not, the consultant has promised to tell me, but they estimate when he gets it, and we don't have one yet.
But you were estimating that it was gonna be like $25,000 per person.
The dividing the $1 million by 22 houses comes out at $45,000 per house, if we were required to pay for it.
If I may,
Sure, yes.
my estimate now is that it's about half of that per person.
Okay.
All right, that's my estimate. It's still a huge amount. And as the previous testimony was presented, we can't afford it. Almost, we're retired. My income's not going anywhere. I would have brought Monk with me, all right, Paul Foley, but he's on visiting with his family and I don't know, someplace out west, all right? But I mean, he's, what is it, 86 years old? I mean, he's a veteran. I mean, he's not getting any more money. We're not getting any more money, you know?
I'm over 81.
Yes, go ahead.
Part of the problem that we had in all counties, we couldn't find enough engineers to do.
Exactly, it's because we're all towns, we're all competing for the same pool of different people.
So, you know, one engineer is done, you can walk
I understand there are only 7 firms in Vermont that do this kind of work. Which sounds like a lot until you dump 700 projects forever.
Any other questions?
Great.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your story.
Sure.
Really appreciate it and we can find some solutions.
I hope you do.
Thank you.
We live nearby if you want to drive by and see what we look like.
I would love to.
I would be glad to give you a stand.
Good.
You know, if you knock on the door of 107, we'll take you around like we took the consultants.
Senator Watson is your
It's
senator.
very, yeah, so let's make that happen. That would be great.
Yeah,
Okay.
you know, we'd love to show you our wetlands.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough.
But what the former person said is very true for us, and you may hear it more.
Yeah, the first speaker nailed all the points.
That's good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on to Lisa. I don't want to mess up the pronunciation of your name. Chicketty. Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Grab that one. Okay, so for the record, my name is Lisa Chicketty. I'm the stormwater coordinator for the town of Williston. So I'll be speaking kind of on behalf of the works department today. Happy to pause at any point for questions on either our thoughts on the bill or just your general stormwater operations and how stormwater operates. So my name is Lisa Chicketty. I'm the stormwater coordinator for the town of Williston. I work within the public works department to coordinate compliance with our MS4 permit, which is now is the municipal separate storm system. So in this testimony, I'll highlight some of the work we do and present our 3 main concerns for your consideration regarding this bill, page 41. Number 1, access to funding should not hinge on the municipality's ability to fully take over responsibility for the 3-acre permit and the private infrastructure. Number 2, town impervious areas should not be included in the permit boundaries for 3-acre permits. And number 3, we're concerned that many homeowners, as we
seen by now, will still experience really significant financial burdens, even with the funding that's been proposed here. So I'll go into details on those, but again, in then for questions. So to address the first point, I want to begin by saying that the Wilson Department of Public Works is in support of continued state funding for work that's on compliance with the state stormwater permits. However, we're concerned that a significant portion of the funding is specified for 3-acre sites only if they're taken over by the municipality. And while we as the Department of Public Works work hard to provide services to the residents of Williston, we have to consider the whole town, not just what works for specific sites. So as a stormwater coordinator, I'm the only staff in Williston that's designated to work on stormwater management. My work is focused on compliance with our MS4 permit, and that includes regular inspections and maintenance for drainage on roadways. We oversee catch basin cleanings and street sweeping, inspecting stormwater outfalls, inspecting construction sites within Williston, which you have some big ones going on. Responding to residents' concerns, which you get a lot of because it's a very wet area, have a lot of high groundwater and drainage issues. We're also working towards completion of our phosphorus control plan and flow restoration plans, which both include retrofitting some older facilities and constructing some new facilities. So additionally, we're implementing a road salt reduction plan by working with our highway department to reduce road salt use on town roads. And as part of our flow restoration plan, Williston already maintains 18 stormwater ponds, which require regular inspections and maintenance. So our stormwater program is in compliance. We're on track to meet our phosphorus reduction goals, but we're also at capacity. We do not have the staff or equipment to take over the maintenance of all these 3-acre sites, and if we were to expand to do so, there would be an increased financial burden to all property owners in Williston, because we would have to increase our utility fee. So I understand in other towns, taking over these sites is sort of a really productive method for them to reach their phosphorus reduction goals or their flow reduction goals, but that's not how it's working out in Williston, because every town is just in a unique situation. So I don't think it's fair, for the residents' access to state funding to hinge on whether a municipality has the ability to take over these sites. I also want to clarify that even when a municipality voluntarily takes over a 3-acre permit, that municipality will almost certainly still be relying on outside engineering and construction services. So the costs will not go down just because a municipality takes it over. There's sometimes a misconception that because we have excavators and operators, we'll be able to do this work on our own, but we don't have the capacity to be constructing all these new sites. So that would still be a contracted service. Okay, so that's point number 1. I'll move on. There's some questions now.
Okay, go ahead. I want to ask questions. Sure. So, does each, this is gonna sound
No, go for it.
does each town have a phosphorus reduction target? Like, does Williston have a target that you're working toward? And
Yeah.
who gave you that target, DEC or?
Yes, so it's, I'll say. I think the MS4 towns each do based on what watersheds they're in, so because we're flowing into the new CRs based on the new C, and we are given our own. Williston as a town and with our MS4 permit is given our own phosphorus reduction goals.
Okay, do you know, is that only for the MS4 towns that they get an actual goal? Cause like you're the first one that I remember mentioning.
I can only speak to it being for the MS4 town, but that's kind of a good question for DEC.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we had somebody from one of my towns from Middlebury and they're not an MS4 town,
Right.
and I don't know that they have a specific.
Yeah, I think
target
that the MS4 permit is sort of just a regulatory rule they use to. Like, enforce these total maximum daily loads, and that's where the phosphorus reduction plan comes from.
Right, cause you had impaired riverways in
Yeah.
your, whatever, waterways in your town, so you
Yes.
got this MS4 permit, which I learned yesterday. I'm slowly learning all this stuff. And then, so if you have an MS4 permit, you don't have a bunch of little permits underneath it, stormwater permits. The MS4 permit is the sort of umbrella for the whole town,
Yeah, it
right?
covers all of the town impervious, and we can incorporate other permits into it. If that, it like helps us towards our other goals.
So if, I hear you that you don't want to, but if you were to incorporate some of the private 3 acres, that would then fall under your MS4.
We could incorporate into the MS4 permit, and historically, we've only done that if facilities are already brought up to current standards. We've never taken over a facility that's not up to the current state.
Got it, yeah. And then, do you charge utility fees?
We do have a
A
utility.
stormwater
Yeah,
utility.
so we base it on the equivalent residential unit, so there was like a flyover study to see what the average single family home has for impervious surface on their lot. And then every single family home and most like duplexes and triplexes, each property owner gets billed $51 a year. And then for commercial sites, we do a calculation to see how much impervious is on their lot compared to the total lot. Then do a little calculation to figure out.
Mhm. And if somebody reduces impervious surface, can they reduce their fees or come into compliance by a reduction in impervious surface?
Yes, people can apply for like credits or recalculations, and I think it just doesn't happen very often. Typically people aren't tearing up parking slots unfortunately, but yeah, they can get credits for with there's a commercial site, we're doing the calculation anyway, and if the impervious size changes, we can recalculate it. Typically it's going up. But yeah, I think if it went down, it's what we could reassess the fee.
I'm just optimistic. I shouldn't stop being optimistic. Anyway, okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of development in Boston.
Just on that point, so you have stormwater utility.
Yes.
And for the commercial lots, did you the rate that you're charging them, is it on the total amount of impervious or is it the ratio? Or like the percentage?
A little bit of both. We use the total it's a formula. We use the total impervious to get kind of a factor to multiply the total lot size by, so it's essentially, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Any other questions since we're stopped? Okay. Okay, go, carry on. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so currently for some 3-acre sites that are located off of town roads, the town road has been included in the permit boundary. And so the town of Williston is a co-permittee on this permit, and that's required by the state. And that's for business and residential sites. So we're requesting that the town's impervious areas be removed from the permitting boundaries and the town be removed as co-permittee. The town is already maintaining stormwater infrastructure along all town roads under our own MS4 permit, some sort of doubled up on these impervious surfaces. We'll continue to be maintaining the roads under our MS4 permit, but with this duplicate permitting on the town areas, it creates 2 sets of application reviews for A&R and creates confusion for the residents regarding responsibilities under the 3-acre permits. So we've been spending a lot of time working on legal agreements with these neighborhoods and businesses, where the town is required to be a co-permittee. And these legal agreements basically just outline that the town will continue to maintain everything within the right of way. And then the residents will be responsible for everything on private property. So because of this, the town is required to focus a lot of time on these legal agreements with the sites where we're required to be co-permittees. And if we weren't focused to provide so much focus, or we're required to put so much focus on it, then we have time available to more equitably support all 3-acre sites as they navigate this permitting system.
That's a question about that. So this is the first time I'm hearing about this, and it's really interesting, because I'm not a fan of duplication. If it's covered, it's covered,
Yeah.
right? And so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. So a town road in Williston might have, that road might be, you may be taking care of the stormwater under the MS4 permit, but they have to do that paperwork again for a 3-acre permit. Is
We're
that,
not doing the paperwork again, but the town impervious is included in the paperwork for the 3-acre permit. So in our case, the HOAs or the residents or the business owners are doing the paperwork for the 3-acre permit, but the town impervious is included on that. So in their application review fees, they're paying for the town road. And then it gets very complicated when you consider treating the stormwater runoff, but we're just asking that in the permit boundary, our road shouldn't be, because that area is currently being built.
when you say in the permit boundary, you mean the MS4 permit, or do you mean the 3-acre?
Yeah, take it out of the 3-acre one, that should be a private permit. We've been added on to those because they're including the town road. But we want to be taken back off and just have our road be on our town permit, hopefully.
Yes, go
And
ahead.
just that, you said earlier, that makes you a co-permittee with, and that sort of drags you into this
Yeah.
when you don't want to be. And also, did you know if that requirement is statutory or is that in the permit rules? Is this something that we can change, or is this
Not
something that we
sure.
have to tell
Yeah.
them to change?
I'll have to ask.
Yeah, this word, that's
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, and so.
So I have a, similar situation where I had people with 3 acre permit requirements and said, what about the town road? Well, technically the town road, you own both sides of the road, they have an easement across that property, so the property technically, from what I was told, belongs to the land. Even though the town had the road, they have an easement across your property, so.
we have warranty deeds for the town roads, not easement.
Oh,
So
okay,
I don't, yeah,
okay.
maybe it's theirs though, that's a really good question.
It's interesting, but thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up. Yeah, sorry, unless there's more questions again, since we're stopped.
It's okay.
Okay, all right.
Okay, yeah, that sounds fair.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to note though that this situation may not be the same for every town. I think it's because you're an MS4 town.
Yes.
You have an umbrella permit. Or.
Yes, and then it's also only because these are town roads. There's other situations where the town did take over the road for the neighborhood, so the town's not moved in as a co-permittee.
Right, so for example, the Middlebury one that we heard about, the town is involved in it because there are town roads in this development. But they are not an MS4, so they're not permitted already.
You're not otherwise covered.
Yeah.
There's no duplication.
There's no duplication, right? You could question whether it's necessary, but it's not a duplication situation, yeah.
They do, I think all towns do have the municipal roads general permit.
Oh, you're right, actually, you're right, oh, yeah, okay.
Stormwater, and there are different permit requirements, but I still creates a lot of confusion and maybe it's overly complex to have one service on 2 permits.
Right, yeah. But for your purposes, the municipal roads general permit, because you all have that as well.
It's just.
That's not, in this case, the creating the duplication.
Yeah, our MRGP standards are under our MS4 permit, so that's all the.
Oh, okay, so it's all sort of together, okay. Interesting.
A lot to learn.
Yeah.
But you're the expert.
Yes, it's so good.
Trying.
She comes for a while.
So for the last point on the topic of the cost of compliance compared to the proposed funding, you've already heard a little bit about that today, and Beecher himself also gave some really thoughtful testimony. And he presented some rough numbers that are in line with what we're expecting in Williston as well. So I have some specifics if you want to hear them later. I don't need to go into them right now, but essentially we want to build upon what he said, because the funding proposed in this bill will not provide the desired financial relief to homeowners or business owners. Whether the homeowners are paying through loans, grant matches, or municipal fees, they will still face intense and lasting financial burdens to comply with these permits. So we do support extending deadline. This could provide at least a little bit of time for property owners to catch up. And we also support the regionalization study, as there could be more efficient methods to meet stormwater treatment if we look beyond municipal boundaries and work together. Okay, so thank you all. If you have more questions and have any. So.
Feel like I'm sure more will come up, but thank you, really appreciate
Yeah,
it,
thank you.
your testimony. Okay. Super, all right, we're gonna move on to Chelsea Brooks, who is with us virtually. Can you hear us, Ms. Brooks?
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to.
Wonderful.
There we go. My phone is sort of the best camera quality here, but it's also the most challenging to get to go on work.
No worries at all, it's all good, we can hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for having me today. My name is Chelsea Brooks. I am a resident of Richmond, Vermont. And to clarify up front, I'm not a homeowner subject to the 3-acre permit. I come before you today as citizen advocate and someone who has been directly affected by stormwater management issues in my community. What began as a personal experience has grown into a broader commitment to understanding and improving Vermont's stormwater permitting system. Over the past year, I've invested significant time studying the technical, regulatory, and policy dimensions of stormwater. I've engaged directly with staff at the Department of Environmental Conservation in an effort to advocate for more equitable and effective regulation. So, if at any time you want to stop me or ask anything, please do, but I'll continue to read and calm the nerves. So, um, to sort of speak to the history of this, in Richmond, there's several sites with legacy operational stormwater permits, often referred to as orphan sites. These developments from the 80s and 90s were where the initial permits were granted, but responsibility for permit renewal and long-term maintenance was never clearly assigned. Developers moved on and no legal entity stepped in to take over the permits. The state then approached municipalities to adopt these sites, offering a meager stipend. And towns adopted these orphan sites, such as Richmond, adopted several, and then continued the renewal of those legacy stormwater permits. Decades later, individual homeowners are being asked to shoulder the full burden of compliance with 3-acre stormwater permitting. An example being the Southview neighborhood in Richmond. This is not a planned community with an active HOA. They don't have a shared stormwater maintenance fund or legal mechanisms to coordinate action. These are just everyday homeowners, many of them aging or on fixed incomes, facing complex and expensive regulatory hurdles that they had no role in creating. And I believe the legacy situations cannot move forward without access to greater support and funding, which will offset the burden that currently appears to be inequitable and unfair. I support the amendments to 1264 and H481, particularly those expanding the Developed Lands Implementation Grant Program and the Municipal Stormwater Implementation Grant Program. These programs are essential. However, I am concerned because the bill prioritizes municipalities for funding in a way that may leave individual permittees behind. Cases where a municipality refuses to assume legal responsibility, private citizens may still be on the hook for costly permitting and implementation. Because municipalities are given priority and consume available funds, residents of orphaned or fragmented legacy developments may be left with no support. I urge that we ensure private entities and municipalities have equal priority in grant funding under these programs. Fairness demands that both public and private stakeholders do the right thing. Trying to do the right thing, receive the funds and help they need. Municipalities, as we just heard, are hesitant to assume legal responsibility for 3-acre sites due to concerns about long-term costs and liability. And so recognizing that some municipalities are critical partners and others may need to decline responsibility should be clearly addressed in the design of the grant programs and funding criteria in H481. So another piece of this that I'd like to speak to is the missed deadlines. So 481 is proposing to extend deadlines. And I think that it's important to recognize that sort of where we got to this point, we're already past key deadlines for the 3-acre permit. But according to a presentation by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns yesterday, 177 of 677 3-acre sites have received permits. I don't think this is indicative of residents' lack of care for Vermont's water quality, but rather a lack of clear communication and guidance from the ANR and the DEC. It's not due to neglect, but rather due to complexity and technical nature of permitting process. Engineering design, wetland delineations, and soil sampling are not only expensive, they're seasonally constrained and require specialized professionals who are in short supply. DEC, I think, should be held responsible for providing more thorough, user-friendly, and seasonally realistic guidance documents to support these permittees, because without clear roadmaps, many communities will continue to miss deadlines through no fault of their own. Something else that I would also like for you to potentially consider is expanding consideration of lands outside of permitted sort of areas. So whether it's new development, expansion, redevelopment, or existing development, I believe that the impact of runoff upslope should be considered. It's unfair to burden a development such as Southview with the responsibility to manage and treat stormwater that isn't the result of only rainwater or runoff from their individual impervious surfaces. Instead, in a town such as Richmond and a development such as Southview, where we have steep and challenging topography, water is always going to run downhill. Water is the common enemy. And if these developments are receiving stormwater discharge from lands outside of their permitted area or parcel boundaries, this should be taken into consideration. I'm unsure of the appropriate solution. However, as I am told that by DEC doesn't have the jurisdiction to impose permitting on anyone and everyone, so those upslope cannot effectively be held accountable. I do, however, think that this could be addressed by the regional research. I think it could also be an opportunity for municipalities to step in, apply for grant support, and establish stormwater funds of their own, which could additionally support and offset burden to legacy 3-acre sites. And effectively address water as the common enemy, which affects all residents of the town. While I'm not a homeowner within a 3-acre site, I would still like to do my part, whether that be contribution to a municipal fund or simply treating my own stormwater on my own property to avoid downslope effects. And finally, the final piece that I'd like to speak to is certainly the most close to home for me. And it has to do with, we're focusing on 3-acre stormwater permitting right now, obviously with these goals to get to water quality standards that the state has set. But I think there's definitely some oversight and loopholes that are to be shown a light on. So while legacy developments are being required to retrofit their stormwater systems, new impervious surfaces are still being constructed without operational permits due to loopholes in how VEC interprets 10 VSA 1264 and the thresholds in the 9050 general permit. Since May of 24, I have been corresponding with DEC staff, including Kevin Burke, to reconcile how the law is written versus how it is applied. Kevin explained that the half-acre threshold relative to new development only applies to a parcel with no prior existing development, meaning no impervious surface on the entirety of the parcel. If there's any existing impervious, the half-acre new development regulatory threshold does not apply. This means that a developer right now can construct up to nearly 1 acre of new impervious surface without an operational discharge permit, as long as the parcel had any impervious surface. This interpretation undermines the goals of 2018 Act 181, and it is perpetuating the unfairness and inequity of burden being placed on 3-acre sites to meet the reduction goals if new development isn't even being held to appropriate standards. Amending the rules within 10 VSA 1264 will close this loophole and align with legislative intent. I've personally seen the negative effects of upslope, unregulated development, which is not managing or treating stormwater in Richmond. A project exactly like this leads directly to one of our 3-acre stormwater sites being Southview. Sort of in conclusion, I certainly did not set out to become a stormwater advocate. I simply wanted to protect my town and understand these rules. But what I found was a regulatory landscape that's inconsistent, unclear, and unfair, especially to legacy communities who had no say in how their neighborhoods were built. Vermont made commitments to the EPA to reduce pollution under the Lake Champlain TMDLs, and we will not meet these goals if we allow new development to bypass stormwater treatment and place disproportionate burdens on residents of decades-old neighborhoods. I want to emphasize how critical I think it is that we close these permitting loopholes. If we continue to hold 3-acre sites to high standards while overlooking newly constructed impervious surfaces exceeding half an acre, we are perpetuating a system that is inherently inequitable. This perceived and actual imbalance of enforcement and expectation undermines public trust and jeopardizes our shared clean water goals. We must fully commit to the implementation and enforcement of 10 VSA 1264 across the board. That means holding both existing and new development accountable, not just legacy sites. A narrow and short-sighted focus on 3-acre sites misses the broader picture and risks allowing pollution from new sources to slip through the cracks.
Thank you. Ms. Brooks, I have a question. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding that last point about how the law is being interpreted. Can you, well, actually, let me say what I thought I understood, and then please correct me if I don't have it right. Is it, so it's that if there is no impervious surface on a particular parcel, that someone could build, did you say up to 1 acre of impervious surface without getting effectively a discharge permit? Is that, did I get that right?
It's actually the opposite.
Okay, sorry, say it again.
No, it's okay. It's certainly complicated. Like I said, I've been corresponding with DEC for nearly a year about this, and several engineers. I'm not going to name names because I certainly haven't, requested their permission. But essentially, what it comes down to is in 10 VSA 1264, there's a prohibition section, and in that it explicitly states that no impervious surface shall be constructed or redeveloped of greater than half an acre without obtaining an operational discharge permit. And this was interesting to me, and I've seen it in presentations to legislation, such as a presentation by Michael O'Grady earlier in the legislative session, where he simply just said half an acre is the threshold. Like if you create half an acre of impervious surface, you're getting a permit. But that's actually not how it works. And interestingly, I've actually encountered engineers who thought that's how it was intended by legislation. But I've been told by DEC that that's not the rule. And I'm witnessing firsthand that's not actually how it's applied. So what happens is if you have they call it a tract or tracts of land. So like a parcel, right? If you have a parcel of land and you want to develop it, as long as it has any impervious surface whatsoever, it doesn't matter what the quality is, the quantity, the type. If there is impervious surface existing anywhere on the tract of land, it could be in the opposite corner to what you're doing, and it could be like 0.1 acres of impervious existing. That means that that person can then be held to what are called expansion thresholds. And it means that they can develop up to, or that they can have a development which their final impervious can be up to 1 acre. It cannot exceed 1 acre. So if you think about it in that way, a tract of land that has, just a tiny driveway, maybe they just had like a little gravel access onto this parcel, that tract of land then can develop up to 0.89, 0.9, 0.95, depending on how little impervious is existing. As long as they stay under 1 acre, they can do it and have no consequences. And that just doesn't, I understand that the goals of this Act 481 are surrounding 3-acre permitting, but in letters that I read from Thomas Chittenden, he really was bringing up the fact, and I've seen it here in town, that constituents and members of the town it's not that nobody cares about clean water. It's that this seems unfair and there's no way to get to these regulatory goals, and sort of getting from point A to B seems unattainable, whether it be for finances or whatever. But it just seems unfair to not bring up this point, because as I said, the homeowners in the town of Richmond in the Southview development, which there are people who are actually in the development and can speak more to this than I can, but they don't have impervious surfaces nearing 1 acre. However, they're being held to these standards, and then developers in town uphill from them are able to develop up to 1 acre, and the water runs down directly into Southview.
Right. Thank you for that explanation. I feel like I understand that now, so that's very helpful. Really appreciate your explanation there. Other questions? Yes, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the statute right now as you were explaining it. I think it might be helpful to have Mike go crazy come in and talk about it.
Yeah.
I see the language that you're talking about, but I don't see where the exemption or the, you know, the
Yeah, I don't,
is listed in law, so I don't have the rules in front of me, but I wonder if it's in rule.
I didn't read that there was an exemption.
Well, we can ask Michael Grady about that, and yeah, get some clarity. I think it'd be good context.
Sorry, I'm certainly willing to also send you any sort of research or resources that I've compiled, because I have lots, and point out where that expansion rule is.
That would be great, and you're reminding me that I should have said to the other folks who have testified, if you are willing to submit any written testimony to follow, so that we can include that on our website, that would be excellent.
Yeah.
So particularly if you have resources, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I just am conscious of time here. I'm thinking we should go through one more witness, and then we'll take a break. And then we'll jump back in. Yes, all right. Mr. Thompson, welcome.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today. Just for the record, my name is Doug Thompson, and I am actually a resident of one of the impacted properties in Southview. So it's a nice segue from Chelsea's testimony. I've been living in Vermont for 32 years now, and been in the same home in Richmond for 23 years. And I just want to state up front, I totally agree with the intent of addressing clean water. I just disagree with the approach under the 3-acre rule. Just to give you a little background, my interaction with the 3-acre rule is somewhat limited. We received a letter back in August of 2024, myself and many of my neighbors, stating that we have a past due stormwater application. And it went in to speak to the fact that we had an incomplete initial notice of intent, and then we were past due our full notice of intent, neither of which I was aware of at the time. It also explained that we were past our deadlines. Deadlines couldn't be extended, and failure to comply would result in potential enforcement actions, including financial penalties and placing a lien on property. So obviously, as one would expect, there was a flurry of activity as all our neighbors received these letters, and we tried to understand what was happening. We did reach out to the town of Richmond, and we learned that the town had historically been addressing our permit renewals, and had been aware of the expired permits and the requirements under the 3-acre rule. However, due to the increased cost associated with the 3-acre rule, the town decided it wasn't in their best interest to manage our renewals going forward, and decided to take no further action. So since the receipt of the letter, we've been communicating regularly with the town officials. We've also had many discussions with representatives from the ANR to try and address our concerns. And in addition, we've also contacted our state representatives, which I believe is what's led us to this conversation today around the amendment. So I want to focus my testimony on really two of my primary concerns around the 3-acre rule. The first concern I have is around equitable distribution of cost. So it's my understanding that the cost of addressing the requirements of the 3-acre rule is being borne by a very small percentage of Vermonters. I believe the DEC documented that the 3-acre sites include 5% of landowners. In addition, there's an old article from 2019 where an ANR employee even questioned the fairness of having such a small subset of landowners incur the cost associated with the 3-acre rule. In my mind, I don't understand how we can ask such a small percentage of Vermonters to bear the cost, which benefits a much larger population, right? If we're targeting those who are impacting clean water, I think we missed our target. If we're targeting those who we benefit from clean water, again, I think we missed our target. The cost involved in permitting, engineering, remediation are non-insignificant. In our particular case, they're currently unknown, right? We're still working through some engineering. We've heard a number of estimates on costs. They vary widely, all of which are concerning. Further, and in addition, the cost estimates don't take into account what I would refer to as indirect costs. Indirect costs such as impacts to property values or insurance. If you're one of the lucky properties in which remediation has to occur. We've been allocated some funding through ARPA funds for permitting and engineering, but the bulk of the cost is going to be around remediation, and those figures are still unknown to us. The Southview situation is even more complicated by the fact that there's no legal entity. We don't have an HOA to help facilitate the process, which makes coordination of all the impacted properties difficult, if not impossible. We just can't get 48 property owners to agree on anything. My second concern is around an effective solution, right? I've not seen any evidence that stormwater runoff from the impacted properties in Southview have any negative impact on water quality, nor is there any proof that forcing Southview property owners to spend substantial sums of money to treat stormwater have any meaningful impact on water quality. The implementation of the rule and the sites selected is based on a theory that impervious surfaces impact water quality. I'm not an environmental engineer. I can't argue the theory, but it doesn't alleviate my concerns that application of general theory and potentially result in spending large sums of money with negative impact. Implementation should be based on facts, right? Not assumptions, not theories. It's sort of in my mind like going to the doctor, right? They're not going to prescribe a treatment based on a theory. They're going to run tests, and they're going to prescribe a theory, any sort of treatment based on direct evidence, right? I don't see any of that happening here. It's all based on the assumption and theory based on impervious surfaces. In addition, for the Southview example, the selection was based on an existence of a particular permit. There are larger neighborhoods without permits not included in the rule. In fact, there are other portions of Southview that are not even impacted. So our neighborhood is much larger than the impacted properties. Right now, there's 48 impacted properties in Southview. There's a number of other properties within Southview that were built subsequent to our homes that are not impacted by the 3-acre rule because they didn't have a particular permit or they didn't have a particular permit at all, right? All of those properties are actually uphill of the 48 impacted properties. So we're now responsible for their stormwater runoff as well as our own. So when we approached the ANR representatives with some of our concerns about testing individual sites, the answer was it's too large an undertaking and it'll delay the implementation. I'm not sure that's a good excuse to not really run some significant tests to really understand how we are impacting the clean water. Further in Southview, in the Southview example, again, we have our 48 homes that are impacted. Many of the homes are not impacted. Again, we are downhill. We are actually at the bottom of the Southview neighborhood. All of the remaining Southview properties are uphill from us. So the current approach does not factor in the source of the stormwater, only the current status of an existing permit. So my feeling is we need to be analyzing water discharges, determining sources, the flow of water, to provide a better bang for our buck as far as remediation. We shouldn't just be basing it on a theory, and we shouldn't be just be basing it on a permit. Now, as far as the amendment goes, I did have an opportunity to read through H.481. 481. I don't believe the amendment goes far enough. I see a lot of modifications in there about entice municipalities to take on full responsibility. I don't see why, especially in the case of Richmond, why a small municipality, what benefit would be for them to take on full responsibility for this, right? I can also, we've already seen, in our discussions and our public discussions with our town officials around Southview's particular issue. We've seen tensions rise in town as, between impacted property owners and non-impacted property owners, nobody wants this to be their problem. And the way non-impacted property owners look at this in Richmond is, why is Southview trying to make this Richmond's problem? This might be an option for larger municipalities, but smaller municipalities, they lack the resources to undertake this effort. In my mind, it's just trying to get municipalities to take responsibility for this is just passing the buck. And I would say that even asking the town of Richmond to take this on would just make an already expensive process even more expensive, because they would need resources to administer the process. And again, it doesn't necessarily solve the issue of funding, because the town's just going to act as a facilitator. They're going to pass the actual cost on to the impacted property owners. In addition, I see a number of dates being kicked out. Again, in my mind, it's not solving the problem, it's just kicking the can down the road. Finally, in addition, additional funding opportunities I've seen written in the amendment, I don't necessarily, they're not clear to me whether or not they're going to help our particular situation or not. And they're definitely not going to address the indirect costs that I mentioned earlier in my testimony. And I also don't see anything that addresses the mechanics of how we're supposed to implement this. We have no guidance on how this should work. How do we, for example, how do we address the legal aspects of remediating stormwater on a neighbor's property? Southview doesn't have common land, right? Remediation is going to have to happen on somebody's property. So how do we legally make that happen? So my recommendation is, in my opinion, it's clear the state's not ready to implement stormwater remediation in an effective and equitable way. So I recommend the following. I think we need to revert back to the permitting process that was there prior to the 3-acre rule to address the current expired permits. And this would help remove this sort of cloud of uncertainty that's currently hanging over the heads of the 3-acre property owners, right? And at that point, enact a study to review the feasibility of things like regional stormwater utilities or other approaches. The current approach doesn't work due to the number of unintended consequences. And trying to fix it with amendments is really just doubling down on what's not working, right? There's no reason at this point to drag a small group of Vermonters around while the state tries to figure out a new plan. Get us what we need, get us set up with new permits, let them expire in 3 to 5 years. And once the state has a plan how to address this, come back around. At this point, it's just causing stress. And now we're going to extend deadlines, and the stress is going to continue for years, right? Further, I'd even consider exempting legacy residential developments. These homeowners did not buy their homes knowing that this future cost was coming, and especially where there's no legal entity to even facilitate the implementation, right? Right now, like I mentioned, there's no HOA in Southview. It's just difficult to coordinate a number of disparate homeowners and come to any level of agreement. And if you want to come after those properties, then impose new requirements when there's development or expansion or redevelopment of those properties. And again, I think we need to focus our attention on confirmed significant impacts on clean water, right? In other words, not theoretical, right? Let's figure out what's really causing the issue and let's put our money there, right? Where we can make a good impact and get the best bang for our buck. So once again, I just want to thank this committee for providing me the opportunity to testify. I also want to thank our state representatives, the town of Richmond officials, and even representatives from the ANR. They're all working to help us navigate this. And I would just like to add on a personal note, my wife and I have really enjoyed living in Vermont. We look forward to remaining in Vermont. As we move into the next stage, we're becoming empty nesters, eventually, hopefully retirees. But it's these targeted financial impacts like the 3-acre rule and an impact on us financially that make that are moving somewhere else. Okay, I'm happy to take any questions anybody has.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Okay. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing your story and perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we are going to take a break. Let's take a break till 10:35. So it's a little bit more than 10 minutes, and then we'll get started after that.
Okay, we're live.
Okay, we are coming back from a break, Senate Natural Resources and Energy, still Wednesday, April 9th. And we are going to kick things off with Mr. Violent. Welcome from Berrytown.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So. At least it's not after lunch.
Right, exactly.
With the break, so now always coming after lunch. is Tough one.
That goes.
Break's not as bad.
Yeah.
So good morning, and thank you for the opportunity, for me to be here today to provide you with, some of the experiences from a municipality standpoint, from the town of Berry. The frustration that we've had and the major concerns regarding the so-called 3-acre rule.
Are you with the town of Berry?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should introduce myself, I'm Chris Violet, the town manager
Oh,
for
okay,
the town of Berry
Got it.
and
okay, cool, thank you.
For my, it's amazing because, there's so many different things I could have put in my presentation today after listening to everybody before me, because I agree almost with everything. Everybody probably saw me over there shaking my head. And part of that is because we've been at this for so long. And for so long, we felt like we were alone. We were the only ones. And then it's kind of like, wow, we're not. And so, I mean, I could go on all day probably about this. So thank you. But first, I want to express my appreciation to Senator Watson. Senator Watson attended a planning commission meeting back in February of 2023. I don't know if she remembers it or not. During that meeting, she was there actually to discuss some zoning enabling legislation change. Remember the affordable housing and all the changes to zoning. And Senator Watson was there that day to talk about that. But during that discussion, we did bring up the 3-acre rule, and because the 3-acre rule and affordable housing can sometimes go hand in hand, and we probably can't talk about one without the other. And so Senator Watson did hear back then about the complexities and the cost of complying with this new rule, new law. So I believe Senator Watson heard our concerns then. Like I said, I'm thrilled to be able to be here to express some of our concerns. So I'm very grateful. Thank you. So let me be clear, Berrytown supports clean water for Lake Champlain. I gotta believe everybody feels that same. Well, we all benefit from it. And we also understand that the Department of Environmental Conservation and our face challenging tasks to meet federal requirements. So we all get that. So, however, in Berrytown, we have significant, and I'm not sure that word is strong. I haven't capitalized, you can't see it, but concerns about how this legislation was developed to begin with, and you've heard that from other people today. And how and whether it can actually even begin to achieve its intended goals. The complexity, the exorbitant costs, the issues of equity and fairness just raise so many important questions. We really have to ask, how much money do we invest? Where does that money come from to ensure compliance? And there's a real possibility that we don't even become close to achieving the goals. I mean, a real possibility if we're not really looking at the true sources. Berrytown has several also a little bit different than what you've heard so far. Berrytown has several town-owned properties, like other municipalities, that are required to comply with the 3-acre rule. So these are our own parcels, 3-acre impervious surface, and we've addressed most of that. But in addition to that, the town of Berry, we are the permittee. So you kind of heard we are actually the permittee for 8 developments. These 8 developments were prior to 2002. You heard it a little bit earlier. They're legacy permits. They're part of the orphan program. The developers came along, they created the development. And by the time the permit expired, the developer's gone. There's no HOA. There's no homeowners to turn it. The town of Berry ended up, somebody had to in the program. And anyway, we became the permittee for these orphan permits. So, with no other entity to take ownership of these permits, the town of Berry became the permittee, and as the permittee, we conduct the annual inspections religiously. We hire a consultant for that. We don't have staff to do that. We provide continued maintenance as the consultant reports that to us. We go out and take care of whatever the reports indicate that need to be fixed. And then, of course, we do the renewals when the renewals come due. And this comes at a cost of about $20,000 a year that is absorbed by Berrytown taxpayers at this point. So while taxpayers have absorbed the cost of previously permitted and I want to say it again, you heard it earlier. Previously permitted and fully functional stormwater systems, all 8 of our developments have permitted and fully functional stormwater systems that were permitted at the time and have been maintained throughout since then. But the 3-acre rule changes everything. The taxpayers of Berrytown and any other municipality and the people that live in these developments simply can't afford it. They just simply can't afford it. It's not possible. We are making every effort in Berrytown. We've been pretty proactive to meet the requirements and ensure compliance. But it's coming at an unbelievable cost. Of the 8 developments, we have submitted 3 permits. We actually have 1 that's permitted. The other 2 are still in review. The remaining 5 are all in some phase of engineering. So all 8 have been worked or are being worked. We addressed this pretty early. We are working quickly to avoid complications for homeowners and any potential file on their title as a result of having a expired stormwater permit. We don't want that to happen. But this has placed a considerable financial burden again on the taxpayers of Berrytown. To date, we have already spent well over $200,000 on design and engineering, and we anticipate that cost could exceed $700,000 before it's all said and done. Now, we are appreciative of the stormwater attainment assisted grant that we have received. That will provide us. We received a grant of $30,000 for each development. So that will offer us a little over $200,000 to offset some of that roughly $700,000 of engineering costs only. Hopefully we'll get those engineered, we'll get those all permitted, and then comes implementation. That's another whole story. Currently, once the permits are issued, you have 5 years to implement the way the law is currently written. And we're expecting that cost of implementation or construction could be upwards of 10 times that engineering amount. So we're talking probably somewhere between $5 and $7 million to actually install these systems. That's a lot of money for a little municipality. There is significant uncertainty. You've heard a lot of that today. About a lot of things, certainly the cost and who will bear the costs. The town's limited financial capacity to absorb these costs has led to considerable anxiety, uncertainty, both at the municipal level and among the individual landowners that live in these developments, as you heard from the couriers earlier today, who live in one of the developments that the town has. I get asked on multiple occasions from residents that live in these developments, and what they ask is this going to cost us anything, or who's going to pay for this? And so far, all I've been able to tell them is we don't really know. We just don't know, which obviously causes them a lot of concern, as you heard. The proposed legislation, as I understand it anyways, incentivizes municipalities to assume full legal responsibility for stormwater systems. I really hope, and I know the purpose of it is to incentivize municipalities to take over these stormwater systems, but I hope that that incentive will apply to municipalities like Berrytown, who already bear their responsibility. And opens up opportunities for grant and funding if
we are required to implement these designs. The wording assumes responsibility gives me a little pause for questions, so hopefully that we would be included, having already any other towns like us. Taking responsibility for stormwater systems like we already have comes with complications and certainly liabilities. Creating a much larger and more elaborate system significantly increases these concerns. I'm hoping that legislation from a municipal standpoint, the legislation protects municipalities for taking the ones that either take these on or already have them. We need some protection against liabilities that could come from some of this. We support extending deadlines for sure. I don't know, we're gonna be in a situation, like I said, where we could be within 7 to 8 years of having all of them needing to be implemented and constructed within 5 years. The way it's playing out. So deadlines being extended for sure. Certainly, we need to do that. We also endorse any mechanism that increases funding for compliance or permitting and implementation. I do have some questions that I'll leave you with before you ask me questions. And these are things that, like I said, we were talking about this years ago, as we had these developments facing expiration of the existing stormwater permits. Is it fair and equitable to treat all entities that flow water into Lake Champlain or Mount Omega with a broad brush? I think that's key. Is it fair and equitable, expanding upon that a little bit, to treat Berry Town and our neighbors or other towns like us the same as others, given we are as far away from the Lake Champlain, with 2 more miles, we're in the Connecticut River watershed, so we are as far away from Lake Champlain, and all, as I mentioned, all of our stormwater systems have existing. How do we know what we are contributing to this problem? I suspect very little, to be honest with you. And is it fair and equitable to require an elaborate and expensive stormwater system without measuring existing phosphorus generation from a fully functional permitted system? Again, we're being treated with a broad brush, and the likelihood that our contribution is even making it, it is very unlikely, but yet we are spending hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to comply. Is it fair not to consider a sliding scale or not an opt-out option if it can be proven that there's minimal impact on the watershed? Cost undoubtedly has to be a factor in assessing feasibility with all of that combined in one. In conclusion, we recognize the importance of clean water and understand the mandates imposed by the Environmental Protection Agency. We understand that. However, we have struggled and continue to struggle to understand how we arrived at this situation. How is this law, how is this rule ever put together? A lot of concern about that, and I'll just leave it at that. There's got to be a better way. One that ensures water flowing into Lake Champlain as clean as possible, complies with federal mandates, and does not penalize, as you heard a little while ago, a very small percentage of the contributors with a cost that is completely unaffordable. With that, I again appreciate it. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can't understand. I'm not an engineer.
Fair enough. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. In my evolution of trying to understand this problem, you're not an MS4 town.
We are not an MSP
Okay.
town.
You have a general roads permit because everybody does.
Yes.
See, I'm learning this. Are those residential parcels that you are now have assumed responsibility for, do they include your roads?
Yes.
If your roads were excluded, would they be under the 3 acres? You mean, not
Possibly.
Barry, not you personally.
Possibly.
Okay, and
Probably not all of them. There may be something less than 8. But when you're factoring in the road as part of that 3 acres, that's a pretty significant portion of it.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're looking at rooftops, driveways. So some of the larger ones probably would still, but maybe some of the smaller ones would not.
wait, just, I just realized, are you town or city?
Town.
Okay. And you said that there are 7 parcels or
We
8?
have eight.
Eight.
We have 8 developments.
8 developments that the town has already assumed responsibility for. And they were all previously permitted? Do they all have stormwater systems? But they're not, you don't get credit for them, as we've heard from other people, because they're not up to the standards of the 3-acre permit, is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
Are the systems that are are they in good condition? Are they functioning?
Yes, we have an engineer that we work with, one of the 7, probably in the state that annually will do the inspections on all those things, making us a report. And if there are issues, which there often are, they're typically small, then our own public works will go out and
fix them.
fix them if it's within their capability.
Just seems totally weird to me that we're just making all these places that already have permits, that already have systems. I mean, it'd be different if it was failed, like if it's no longer working, like, I don't know, if something broke and there was running like water into the stream or something. But if it's an existing system that's actually functional, now I know standards change, I get that. And certainly the weather events we're having right now compared to 30 years ago or whenever these were permitted are different. But I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around. So anybody who's listening, and I know people are, because people are texting and emailing us as they're listening, I need to understand why that is. Like, if it's a functioning system, why do we need to re-permit it and have you go through the cost of?
I'm sure some of the answers that would be is it's a functioning system, but not meeting the standards, so it's not treating to the standard that is currently as required as that 3-acre rule.
Yeah, and I guess I don't understand the difference between those standards, like what kind of impact is it actually having on the clean water? Like, is it significant enough to make the costs worth it?
All my answer.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
No, I do not think it's at all, they relate at all. The cost that, again, to reiterate what I said, these are functioning systems. The likelihood that these developments, the Courier's development, they are 100% right. The likelihood that the runoff, any phosphorus, whatever, that is making it through that existing system into the brooks and streams that feed into the Stevens branch, that ultimately feeds into the Winooski River, that all it's got to be unbelievably remote. Yet we're spending tens of thousands of millions and millions of dollars to comply.
Do you have a chloride reduction program in your town?
We do not at this time.
Could we sell you one of those?
We'll talk.
We're doing a bill on salt.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I think anything we can do, I don't, not up to 100% date with that, but I think that's important as well.
Yeah, it seems like if we get towns to comply with that and do that, that would also help, maybe a lot cheaper.
Help expense too.
Yeah, it would be a lot cheaper, save you on salt. Anyway, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Are you able to, with those developments that have a system, a pre-existing system, are you able to incorporate that into the new design in most instances, or?
Yeah, so basically what the engineers come in and do, and we don't have staff people, so we hired an engineer to work on all these sites, so they'll go in and they look at the site, and basically. Essentially from a new lens, there's existing systems but they're redesigning it pretty much from the ground up. They tried it as best they can, and this is another company, they try as best they can, as you heard the Couriers speak. To design these systems within existing, where there's existing systems, or certainly existing easements, that's not always possible, so that's another problem. Not all these developments, we can construct these in land that we have control over, whether it be the right of way or an existing easement. So, so far, It's been difficult to get buy-in from the people that live there because they're afraid they're gonna end up paying the cost. We try to get them to be co-permittees as we reapply. They don't want anything to do with it. And I understand that. Now, we try to explain to them that they are a partner in this with us, because if we aren't able to get a permit, then that is going to then cause them a problem down the road at some point when they try to transfer the property. So we are partners in this, but they are resistant to give up any of their land. They are what you end up trying to do is make the system such that is more aesthetically pleasing, or takes up land somewhere else, and that just drives the cost up when you're doing it considerably.
Yeah.
I just wonder, so I'm very sympathetic to this discussion we've had today.
Thank you.
I get it, feel the issues, but I do want to, have you respond to me when I say, the fact that you're broken goes into another brook, another one before it gets to Champlain actually doesn't change anything. Because if water is flowing down, even if it takes a few miles to get there, it's still doing the same. So it seems to me the real issue is whether whatever is going on in your developments or anywhere else is actually impacting the streams, even if they are a few connections away to getting to Champlain. So I just want to note that even if you are the last one, it still matters in a way of equally if it's getting into the brook that runs the Champlain. So, but nevertheless, having said that, there is a what's going on here. A lot of things that out of this.
I want to ask about stormwater utilities. So Montpelier had considered one, I don't know where they're at with that at this point, but thinking about stormwater utilities as a mechanism for funding these kinds of projects. Is that interesting? Does that seem like too big of a administrative lift? Would it be helpful to have a shared administrator to across municipalities to help facilitate that? And thoughts on stormwater utilities?
Yeah, so, it's something that we have talked about. It hadn't, up until recently, we had the 8 developments, we did what we had to do, put within our general fund budget and pay, but as we move forward in time and there's a lot more discussion about potentially having to explore a stormwater utility at a minimum to help defray the cost of maintaining these systems. But then when you add a 3-acre component to that, under the current, stormwater utility wouldn't really help us with the expense, because now, right now, we basically spread the costs out among all the taxpayers. And that's not sustainable, but it's certainly not with a much smaller core group as part of the stormwater utility. Now, a broader stormwater, I think that's interesting.
Like a regionalized?
Yeah, more like a regionalized. So many of these things, I think we have to look at it as a regional. We're all the flooding, we go from one to the next, so we're all kind of in this together, and I think you have to look at it that we can't look at it really town by town by town.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay,
Just one
yeah, sure.
more question for.
And then we should move on because we've got some more people to get to.
Just thinking about the engineering and the cost of the engineering and then the cost of implementing the engineering. Have your engineer talked to you about how the rules for what they have to do vis-a-vis the engineering are more complicated? In other words, are there more simple fixes to get to what we're trying to get to than is required under the rules?
I'm not an engineer, but I believe the answer would be absolutely yes.
Yeah, I'm also not an engineer. I'm not sure. I think it does all come back to the state stormwater manuals and what qualifies for phosphorus credits. So I'm not sure if they weren't working within that. I'm not sure what they'd be.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Ms. Heim, hello, joining us online. It's good to see you.
Hello, Chair Watson. Nice to see you too. I'd hoped to be there in person today, but my toddler generously shared his cold with me, so I thought I would spare you all from my physical presence. But I do appreciate you having me. Thanks so much. So I'll just jump into it. I know of limited time. My name is Sarah Heim. I'm a resident of the Southview neighborhood in the town of Richmond. I know you're hearing from a couple of us today, so there'll be some overlap. But I'll try to focus on some points maybe more in depth than some of my neighbors have thus far. I appreciate the legislature is considering amendments to the Clean Water Act in order to address some concerns that citizens have voiced, including affordability and the compliance deadlines. However, I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to reach an equitable and common sense solution that addresses phosphorus pollution into the water basin. My neighborhood, Southview, has 48 properties that are subject to the 3-acre site rule, as well as municipal roads that run through our neighborhood. Most of these properties include about an acre of land and a single residential home. Southview does have a pre-existing stormwater permit and somewhat stormwater treatment infrastructure in place, including grass swales. As noted by Mr. Thompson, the town had previously taken responsibility for a stormwater permit under the orphan permit program. However, the town has declined to continue to manage the permit, primarily due to anticipated high future costs and also potential legal liability issues. I first want to address costs. I know you've heard a lot about this today, so please humor me a little bit. The estimated costs of compliance have risen greatly just within the past year. When we initially reached out to DEC in the fall after we received the letter telling us we were out of compliance with this permit, they were estimating the cost of compliance to be around $30 to $50K per impervious acre. I've heard that estimates since then have increased to about $70 to $112K per impervious acre, which is honestly mind-boggling to me. That would translate into about $15,000 per household in my neighborhood, and that's just accounting for our percentage of the impervious surface. Frankly, I can't afford to pay that or close to that. We're a family of 4, soon to be a family of 5. I have small children who need childcare, and this is just not an expense that we had planned for or that we can easily absorb within the next few years. Additionally, there would be the ongoing cost of compliance for having to pay for maintenance for these stormwater systems year over year. These costs are an unknown delta with no expiration date. So if a stormwater infrastructure fails, our neighborhood's on the hook for those as well. The proposed changes to the act don't fix this affordability issue. Financial support to individual property owners remains a tier 3 priority, which is the lowest funding priority. I also question how much support private landowners would receive if funding is dedicated to this, given that there are so many projects across the state, each of which will likely cost between $500,000 to $1 million. At this time, the 3-acre rule is an unfunded mandate that's forcing a minority of landowners to disproportionately shoulder the cost of stormwater remediation for the benefit of the entire state. And frankly, I don't think that spending $1 million for a single neighborhood to treat its stormwater runoff while ignoring the stormwater runoff from most of the other developed property in Richmond makes any sense fiscally or just practically speaking. I also want to address some of what I consider to be the hidden costs of the 3-acre site rule. So when I purchased my property in 2020, right before COVID, it was my understanding that I would only be responsible for the land and property which I own. Our neighborhood has no pre-existing homeowners association, and we have no common elements for which we share any legal responsibility. However, the 3-acre site rule requires that my 47 neighbors and I create a collective entity, such as an HOA, in order to comply. The state has told us they will not accept a permit application from us as individual landowners. Our only option is to form some collective entity. Forming an HOA will create an encumbrance on our properties, which none of us agreed to when we purchased our land, whether it was 5 years ago or 20 years ago. Several of my neighbors have also expressed that they will under no circumstances join any collective entity. And frankly, I understand this hesitation. Some of them fear that they will be forced to construct a stormwater treatment system on their property, which could potentially greatly decrease the value of their property, while others would have no impact on their property, would have no construction on their property. So there's an equity issue there. Others simply find it unfair that they should be required to relinquish some of their property rights as a homeowner to such an HOA. There's also a question, if we do form an HOA, as to how to divide costs. Would this be based on the impervious surface on each property and proportionately distributed? Would we simply divide costs equally amongst the 48 properties? What about property owners who may have already spent money out of pocket to treat stormwater runoff, maybe because they were doing renovations to the property or had some issues with stormwater going into their basements? I know of one neighbor who spent tens of thousands of dollars on this recently. And so should she get some type of credit for that? We also have no guidance from DEC on these questions. And frankly, this is going to lead to conflict between neighbors if we have to figure this out in the future. So what we're facing right now is really a collective action program. I can't force my neighbors to form an HOA, and I can't force them to comply with the permit. Also, I'm not going to sue them to make them comply with this permit, which was suggested by one person. And I think it's unfair that we're being put into the situation where none of us individually is able to comply with the permit requirements unless everybody else sort of does their part and agrees to do so as well. I'm not aware of any other legislation or rule that has such a requirement where you need collective action in order to comply. And this has been very frustrating for us in just trying to figure out how to proceed here. And just one other additional cost I want to mention is just the time and emotional burden this has had on us. You know, we received the letter from DEC back in August. It was the first any of us had heard of this 3-acre site rule. I personally have spent countless hours corresponding with DEC, with the town, submitting Public Records Act requests, reviewing the records produced by the town, corresponding with my neighbors, trying to help them understand this. My background is in the legal field. I'm an attorney. I'm not representing my town, but it gave me some sort of unique skills in trying to sort of sort through some of this. And so I did what I could to be helpful. I've attended many select board meetings. And so this really has been like a part-time job for me, in addition to my full-time job, in addition to my, job as a mother to 2 youngsters. And so it's just been incredibly burdensome just trying to figure this out. And as many people have mentioned, this is a very complex set of regulations that we're looking at. We don't have the resources as a neighborhood to hire a stormwater consultant to help us understand all of this. And I think it's unfair to subject us to regulations that no layperson could possibly fully understand. So there's also the option, if we don't form an HOA, the only other option left to us is for the town to take full responsibility for this permit. That comes with its own challenges, and we've tried to discuss this with the town at several select board meetings. And some of those challenges are that private landowners may challenge the town's authority to build a stormwater treatment facility on their property. This could lead to costly litigation, heated disputes between the town and the landowners in Southview, and even between neighbors, fighting over who should have to get the retaining pond on their property. And in the proposed amendment, at least my reading of it, is the town can only assess an impact fee on homeowners if a majority of homeowners subject to the impact fee vote in favor of it. I don't understand why people would do that, why they would vote essentially for more taxes. I think it would be a real challenge to get people to vote in favor of that if the town were to take responsibility. Finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about how really nonsensical the permit boundaries feel in my neighborhood. So as Mr. Thompson mentioned, the properties in the Southview 3-acre permit area are located downhill from dozens of other properties in our neighborhood. These properties were not included in the original stormwater permit, which was first issued in the late 1980s, and therefore they're not considered part of the 3-acre site under this rule. Runoff from these properties runs downhill onto land in the permit area. When we asked DEC about this, they told us, while we aren't legally required to treat the stormwater runoff from these properties, we need to accommodate for it in our treatment methods. I don't really understand the distinction there. We are basically treating it because we need to accommodate for it in whatever treatment facilities we construct on our properties. And again, these folks uphill from us, who are lovely people and wonderful neighbors, I'm not disparaging them in any way, They won't be financially contributing to any of this, and yet we are going to be responsible for some runoff on their properties as well. There's actually a culvert on what I'm going to call Southview North, so the area north of us, that directs water directly downhill through our permit area. And so there's not a question of whether water comes off of those properties. The question is more of like, how much more do we have to pay because of it? Just to further highlight the absurdity of the permit boundaries, my direct next door neighbor is also excluded from the permit area because their house and their land was not developed as part of the original neighborhood back in the 1980s and 90s. And so again, there's a level of arbitrariness to this all that's very frustrating. So I want to share a few thoughts on the proposed amendments to the bill. At a bare minimum, I would strongly encourage the legislature to allow cost to be a factor in assessing the feasibility for engineering and treatment under the permit. I think there should also be a path to compliance that doesn't require landowners to form an HOA if one doesn't already exist. And I would also just strongly encourage the legislature to consider whether there are more cost-effective solutions to addressing phosphorus runoff. I saw in the proposed amendments that there is a requirement that there would be a formation of a study committee for the creation of regional stormwater utility districts. But under the proposed amendments, those utility districts would assume responsibility for 3-acre site permits. I question why we're not looking at stormwater management on a larger scale, like on a regional scale, county-wide scale, municipal-wide level, again, instead of targeting these rather small communities and telling them that they need to be responsible for all the remediation necessary to get the phosphorus levels down to where we need them to be. In testimony before the House Environment Committee, representatives from DEC said that if the 3-acre site rule is abolished, it would need to come up with a new solution to reach the state's phosphorus reduction goals. I don't see that as a bad thing. We have some really smart people at DEC. We have other states who are doing this in other watersheds through other means. I think it's possible. I understand this is, more work for them, going back to the drawing board. But I truly believe there has to be a much more cost-effective and efficient solution to treating stormwater runoff than the 3-acre site rule. I just want to say I wholly support the state's efforts to clean up the lake and reduce phosphorus pollution. I appreciate the work that DEC has done on this issue. I'm confident that they can come up with a better solution that results in more equitable cost distribution and more efficient treatment of phosphorus in stormwater runoff in Vermont.
Great. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Sarah, thanks for your testimony and for all the bazillions of hours you put into this. I don't know, this is just a question for the air, because I don't know that you, maybe you know, but is the 3-acre parcel maps, or is it only based on the fact that these used to have permits?
Yes.
But
if I understand,
it just does seem very random to me or arbitrary to me. In your description, I'm trying to picture your neighborhood in my head, like your neighbor's not in, the people up the hill from you are not in, but this weirdly shaped parcel in the middle is in, just because it used to have a permit, which seems like double penalty to me, but.
Right. So I think part of it has to do with just the history of how the neighborhood was developed and when the developers got different permits for different parts of the construction. And so at different times, different requirements were in place for stormwater permits. I mean, we'd asked DEC about this. They came to a special select board meeting back in the fall, and they basically said, well, stormwater permit requirements changed over time. So it's possible that when the initial construction was happening and they were getting permits for it, X stormwater permit was required, but however, when they developed this other portion of your neighborhood, they weren't required to have a stormwater permit for that. So they're not included in this. They weren't added to the pre-existing permit. And so it was kind of random in a way as to what parts are included and which aren't. And I do think another of my neighbors, Paige, is going to be testifying soon. And she has some maps, I think, that she's going to share with you folks too, just to help you better visualize this. But I think it was just really kind of like when was that part of the neighborhood developed, what was required at that time? Because what DEC is looking at here in the 3-acre rule is what are the historical permits in place? Do those include 3 or more acres of impervious surface? And are they in compliance with the 2002 water quality standards or not? And if not, then they're subject to the 3-acre site rule.
The 2002 water
That's,
quality?
that's my understanding, was that if you're not in compliance, I think it was 2002 with the standard set at that point in time, then you need to comply with these new rules. But I think we have a possibly more well-informed stormwater experts than I there today who can speak to that. But yeah, basically, like if you're not in compliance with the standards set at a certain point in time, then you need to comply with the new 3-acre site rule.
Okay, thanks. Sarah, I want to ask about that first suggestion you had about allowing money to be spent on engineering. Can you just speak to that just a little bit more?
Allowing, which, sorry, I'm not sure exactly.
Oh,
what you're.
okay, you had mentioned something, maybe I misunderstood, which is also possible. But something about allowing for some kind of money that was available to be spent on the engineering of projects. Is that, maybe that's already allowable?
Yeah, so what we have right now, funding wise, we did get an ARPA fund. The town applied for it on our behalf for the 3-acre sites, since they have to be a co-permittee because of the municipal roads. And then, you know, I know that there's some provisions in the amendments that would, I think the goal of them would be to make more funding available for the actual construction. So there's like the engineering study phase, and then there's the construction phase. And the construction phase is really the most expensive part of this. However, private landowners are a tier 3 priority for that funding. And that remains the case under the proposed amendments. And so the likelihood of us, I think, getting any real meaningful funding to help pay for this and help offset costs feels pretty low, just given how many private landowners are going to be vying for that money. You know, and given how much it's going to cost, like if it's $500,000 to $1 million per neighborhood, per development, you know, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars that people are going to be needing to help fund these projects.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you being so clear and thoughtful about this. So I am, yeah, thank you. And hopefully we can take it's so hard to like, I know how to, I'm having to articulate right now. I feel like we have a lot of work to do on this, so thank you. And hopefully this is a good step forward, but clearly there's gonna be some unanswered questions that we need to work on. So really appreciating your testimony.
Great. Well, thank you all. I appreciate you listening to me today.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on to Ms. Kalita.
Hi. Okay, can you hear me? See me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay.
Welcome.
All right. Thank you to my neighbors and my neighbor not in my neighborhood, Chelsea, who spoke, and I think I'll try to be quicker because both Doug and Sarah, I think, covered a lot of what I would like to say, but you know, we've all worked together on this and spent a lot of hours on this, and you know, as well as raising families and working full-time jobs and all those things. Doug is kind of like our money guy, and Sarah's our legal guy, and I'm the crayon person. So I'm going to show you our maps and help you maybe get a little bit of visual of this, because I think it'll help understand. So I'd like to share my screen if I can, which I think I need permission to do.
Okay. Doing that right now.
Okay, so
hopefully you have permission right now.
yes. Okay, let me get to my letter. How can I? All right, something's going on. Oops. All right, can you see my letter? My PD.
Not yet.
Share the screen.
Okay, hold on. Share. Okay, there we go. Hold. Sorry, I don't know what's happening.
It's okay.
Why is that not working? Try again. Apologies.
It's all good. No worries.
Documents. Docs, that's not right. Okay. That's not going to work.
There's a green button at the bottom of your screen, or you should see one that says share. You need to click on.
Okay, so I see screens. Okay. It's like not, when I hit share, it's not doing anything.
Weird.
You are
Shoot.
so you should be able to.
You know what we could do is
Oh,
talk
okay.
to somebody else and allow you to work on figuring this out.
Okay.
Okay. And
Great.
actually for that, I would move to Mr. Furr, who's here in person, because I know Ms. Conrad is here as well, but digitally. So as you are working on your digital situation, we'll have someone in person.
I'm 100% analog.
And then we'll get to Ms. Conrad after that. Okay, welcome.
Thank you. I am Jay Furr. I'm chair of the Richmond Select Board. And this is sort of turned into Richmond Day, as there's a total of 5 of us here. I don't know that Richmond is especially unusual. I suspect that a lot of the problems we're facing are being faced by other towns. I wanted to go back to this. You're going to get sick if you're in the word Southview. But Southview is our bête noire as far as the water coming down the mountain. We have a total of 6 3-acre sites. 5 of them are handling everything themselves. And that's not counting the town. That's various business owners, the school, and then of course there's the town share of the 3-acre up in Southview. I like some of what the bill says, and I don't like some of it. I like the idea of the deadline being extended because that's just pretty needed. I agree with what's been said before that while new sources of money are great to hear about, we're going to come in fairly low on the priority list to get that money. And the thing that I most want to speak to is the things, I think it's on page 3, that says we would have the right to form a special assessment district, provided a majority of the landowners there consent. Now, you've already heard that in that neighborhood, there is a lot of ill will, and we honestly don't think that we would be able to get a majority of the landowners to vote for it. So we continue to have that issue. How do we pay for this? Now, we've discussed in Richmond a number of powerful alternatives. One of them would be taxing the entire town. The problem with that is that we do have 5 other 3-acre sites that are handling things themselves. Those sites would then basically either have to be carved out of the special assessment district, or we'd be billing them twice. There's also a great deal of anger regarding, as Paige is going to show you on the maps, the Southview neighborhood was not laid out as a normal neighborhood where a developer plotted out a network of roads and houses. The houses were built one at a time. And so that's why there's no homeowners association up there. It's just people who said, I'm going to buy that raw land, I'm going to put a house on it. There is a dormant, you've heard about this, the dormant orphan water permit for the lower half of the neighborhood. No one knew it was even there. It was, we had completely lost all trace of it. It was new stuff that was there. And so when the state came spoke to us last year, we had a big meeting. We had to get our library reading room because there were so many people from Southview who came. We asked why this unusual mechanism of picking the affected landowners who would pay for things. How did it get arrived at? And we found a quote from Patrick Monks, who some of you may know. He works in the stormwater program over at the agency. It's a quote. I can send you the link to the quote. It was referred to as a spitball idea, essentially that no one expected the state to take seriously. So when you said this is so weird, we agree. There were other ideas tossed around like taxing large impermeable sites. But we're in a position where by sheer accident of when your house was built and where your house was built, you are now on tap to pay for the stormwater abatement for the whole state or for our little chunk of the state. We asked, why didn't you expand? Because you know the water's coming downhill. The water coming in the hill from Southview, that part of Southview, it's running on their land, why not include them? And this was what just silenced the whole room. Well, we don't need to take them in. By including you guys, we have enough affected area. Oh, so it is down to, you just cut off heads, counting the number of people until you have enough, and then stop. And so as we've heard, we're looking at, the last figure I have is $110,000 for remediation per acre. And as has been said, I expect that to go up. There are people who will not be able to sell their houses because their titles are now encumbered. They have no idea that this was going to be in place when they bought their land, and title searches turned up nothing about this storm permit. So long story short, extend the deadline, great. Finding some more money in principle good, but it doesn't go far enough. It's not going to help us. And last but not least, how does the town of Richmond handle this? Several people have said that after years of filing whatever paperwork was out there, we simply stopped. We stopped at the advice of our attorney who said if you would be out of your movie to take on full use of this permit, you would be legally liable for something you could not do. Because we cannot force somebody to put stormwater structure on their property without eminent domain. He said, you must not continue taking this on. And the state has not been willing to let us have a permit for just our town roads. They want to continue including the whole thing in one area and force us to be co-permittee with a to be determined group of homeowners, which we see no way to make come to be. And so that's why we come before you. We need some relief because, I mean, as I look around the room, all of you have been involved before you were in the Senate with public policy. We've got the former mayor of Montpelier sitting there. You know that sometimes you get mandates that are literally impossible to comply with. And right now, from where we sit in Richmond, this mandate is impossible, literally legally impossible to comply with. See, no questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your work on this. We do appreciate it. We appreciate the time you spent here yesterday.
Yeah, thank you. So helpful to hear these stories of how it's actually playing out on the ground. It's important. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I want to go back to Ms. Kalita. Are you, how's it going?
Good, I think I have it.
Okay.
All right. Why is this? Okay. Can you see my letter now?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, yay, yay. Okay. So I thought this might be helpful for you all to, and again, thank you very much for listening to us. And I'll try to be quick because I agree with everything everyone said. Here is our letter that we received with this language that if we don't comply, blah, blah, blah. You know, this was really scary to get this. And in particularly in the end, failure to comply, you'll have an encumbered property, all of these things. When I first got this, my immediate reaction was, well, I don't even own 3 acres. So I almost just put it in the recycling. And then all of as Doug said, the emails started flying around. And, you know, I said, okay, I guess I got to pay attention to this. And now I'm, you know, many, many hours into it. The other thing I'd like to point out here is this, the Green Schools Initiative program, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that the state has taken all this ARPA money. And in my view, they've sort of protected all of Vermont from the cost of this by having to do this with our public schools. They've given money to manufactured home communities. but then they're kind of leaving us with the bill as private homeowners. Okay, next, hopefully you can see a little map here. This is the Southview neighborhood in green. Oops, I don't want to do that. You come off 89, exit 11, and come into the Southview neighborhood here. The green is really what everyone considers the Southview neighborhood. The purple is a newer neighborhood called Sadler Meadow. Orange is a neighborhood called Mary Drive, and blue is a neighborhood called Hidden Pines. In the town of Richmond, at one point in the recent years, combined blue, orange, and green into one permit, just to make it simpler to have one permit to cover all of these roads. And when we got our letters, some people in the blue and orange areas got them. It was really confusing, and they've now gotten permission from the ANR to separate out the permit back to just Southview, Hidden Pines, and Mary Drive. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that the town of Richmond is going to continue managing and paying for the permits for Mary Drive and Hidden Pines because they're much less complicated and much less expensive. The next thing I'll point out is the pink line, and that is the 3-acre area. And this all goes uphill. So this area is the what we'll call Southview Middle, Southview North, and then there's a newer section called Bradford Terrace, which has a current stormwater permit. The other sections, Southview Middle and Southview North, do not have stormwater permits from what I understand. And Sarah received a bunch of public records requests, and there's some documentation about this Southview Middle area that was built after the pink area that does not have a stormwater permit because they didn't need one at the time. That neighborhood started being built in like late 2000 into like 2005. So it was during the 2002 changes when they probably should have had one, but I won't get into that because I really don't understand why. Here's a little bit better overview of this. Yellow is the area that I showed you in pink. This is Sarah's house right here, and her next door neighbor that doesn't have to do this, who cannot get to their property without using these roads. This green lot is the developer of this neighborhood is a man named Larry Westall. Larry Westall built this house, but it's not in the permit area. And then this green area here is what I will call Southview Middle, Southview North, and those are the ones that are this is all Southview Drive. They're all part of Southview, but they do not have to be part of the permit. And they're uphill from us. We get all of their water. Here's an elevation that kind of shows you, this all drains downhill. Another thing I'd like to sort of zoom in on is I'm right over here. This is a stream, and this is a neighborhood called Southview, Sadler Meadow. Their water all goes into this stream and into our system. In some of my research, Doug mentioned this. This is from the public comment period that the ANR put out when they were working on this program, and they estimate and they understand that this impacts about 5% of landowners, and something that we've all just had a really hard time understanding. Why are only 5% of us paying for cleaning up the lake? The other thing I'd like to point out is this was from the public comment period that we never got letters about this, didn't know anything about this until August of 2024. Why did the state never inform us? They said they informed the property owners, but they informed the town and not us. Jay spoke about the big meeting we had with the ANR at the town of Richmond put on. And I just wanted you to sort of show the quotes from this, and you can watch the whole meeting if you want. But they talked about, you know, why just part of our neighborhood? We kept kind of hammering that question to really understand this. And they said, yeah, well, you know, we counted this and that, these number, and we met our goal with that. They also admit that there are bigger sites that don't even have permits that aren't included as 3-acre sites, larger neighborhoods than ours. Somebody then asked, another response that we got when trying to understand why us and whatnot, the whole neighborhood. And the answer was, well, we have an obligation to see that these requirements are met. And we know not everybody likes them, but it often is what it is. It was really hard to hear that when they're asking us to spend maybe $20,000 out of our pocket. And the thing I'd like to point out about that statement is we have an obligation. And who is we? I mean, I feel like we is the state of Vermont, not everyone. I mean, I'm sorry, not just 5% of homeowners. Here's another map that is from the ANR mapping tool. The little red dots are impervious surfaces. And the pink is the 3-acre part of Southview. And you can see all of the other homes in the area that aren't part of this. And then another thing I'm going to zoom out here. So pink 3-acre Southview, and then you come down into Richmond and look at all the impervious surface here. And then another thing to point out is our water from our neighborhood, let's sort of zoom in here, eventually goes into this stream and this stream. They go under the highway, past the school, which is a 3-acre site. They'll be doing something there. Then this is all farmland, and then it goes into the Winooski River. And we've talked a lot about this with the town, but I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I would imagine that there's a lot of phosphorus pollutants, whatever, that get picked up along the way between our neighborhood and ending in the Winooski. And it just seems not logical that we're only treating it here. There's been talk about how to make part of our neighborhood pay for this. And I did a little research on special assessments, and this is from the Vermont statute about this. And I just want to point out that it says a special assessment should be a benefit to a particular public improvement. And there's been, you know, argument about this, that we have a benefit because we're complying with the law, but I don't really see it as a benefit. And then this week, I can send this along to you. This is the article that Jay referred to, that the 3-acre permit was a spitball idea. And they even talk about, they said it's a fairness question. Does it make sense to have this relatively limited subset of property owners incur these costs when most landowners would not? So again, I really appreciate you listening to us. I hope that gives you a little bit better of a view of everything. And then lastly, another thought that I'm really struggling is my particular property. It's on a hill. Everything in our area is on a hill, and it goes down a big hill, and then it comes back up about 20 feet up to the road. So all my water drains into this sort of marshy area, and it sits there and then sinks into the ground. Both of the culverts that serve the neighborhood are uphill of this. We also collect the rainwater off our roof because we have issues with our well, and we use that to water our garden and, you know, wash a car if we want to. So I'm already doing a lot of the things that the state recommends to mitigate this, but I can't be seen as an individual property owner, and that I'm doing this and I'm still going to be held to the standards of everybody else. And that just doesn't seem right. So things that I would like to see. I'd really like to see, some consideration for that, consideration of like the natural things that are already happening there. We should be able to do things on our property to disconnect us or reduce our impervious surface and not be held responsible to this, threshold that we're really not putting a lot of, we're not making a big impact on the phosphorus in the lake. And I can pull the map up again, but I think you kind of got the sense that our neighborhood is, some of the lots are an acre, some are 1.5. There's a couple that are like 25 acres, but I would say on average, we have 10 acres of impervious surface over maybe 150 acres of land in the whole area. They don't take density into consideration at all. Our water, we have all this open green area and forested area and marshy areas, and that's not considered at all. Yet, if you go down to the center of Richmond, the density is like the whole opposite. There's so much impervious surface within 100 acres or whatever it would be. And then lastly, the way I feel is that the state is reaching back in time and trying to make me compliant with current standards. And they're just reaching into my pocket and taking money. and I would like to say, like, I am all for clean water, clean air. We have an electric car, we have solar panels, I want to do my part. But I just think this burden is extremely unfair. And I hope you'll consider that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Paige, and all of the people who testified. I totally understand how frustrated you are. It's unfortunate or concerning to me that somebody from DEC said it was a spitball idea, because it's not. It's actually in the law, and I'll read it. It's a person shall not discharge stormwater from impervious surface of 3 or more acres in size without first obtaining an individual permit or coverage under a general permit issued under this section. If the discharge was never previously permitted or was permitted under an individual permit or general permit that did not incorporate the requirements of the 2002 Stormwater Management Manual or any subsequently adopted stormwater management manual. So we don't just make laws by spitballing. So I wasn't here. I don't think any of us were here. I don't know, you weren't here when this was became law, but we don't just spitball in here to make laws. So there must have been some thought that went into this as to why. Now it's clearly not playing out well on the ground, literally, but I want to sort of a little bit push back and defend that there was certainly some thought going into this, but the implementation has not played out well. So
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and that was a A&R person. I think that was, they were tasked with figuring out how to do this, and they threw around some ideas, and that was the comment he made. But when it has such a huge impact on me and my neighbors, it's that's it. I mean, I can't fathom how they think that this is fair. Like, I can't get it. Like, I can't get my head around it.
Yeah, and I hear that. I mean, I do want to just say that A&R and DEC is trying to implement the law as it was passed, and maybe it's not working out really well. And our job is to try to change it so it works out better. But I don't want them to become the sort of scapegoats. They're doing a really hard job to have to go to all these communities and face really frustrated and angry homeowners and town officials. And so I guess I hear how angry and frustrated you all are, and that's totally fair. But I don't want to throw our state workers under the bus for one comment that they made at a public meeting. They are trying to follow the law, and maybe the law needs to be changed, and that, like I said, that's our job. So our public officials at the state and local level work really, really hard, and wanna give them credit for trying to do the best they can under weird circumstances.
Yeah, I'm hearing about that there maybe some need to change how the law works. So,
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah.
it's very clear what I just read, it's
Yeah.
clearly what's being implemented and it's having unintended consequences. And also this law, the larger law of the Clean Water Act, as it's called in Vermont too, that it was passed in 2017, I believe, was like titled the All In.
Oh,
So it
yeah.
was kind of like everybody was supposed to participate. And I've heard from everybody impacted, like, why am I the one?
Right.
It's not just individuals, it's a whole big group that are being tasked with various parts of it, and I think that implementation consequences are severe in some cases, and we have to sort of weigh that. But the intent, and this was before I was here, so I was not involved, but the intent was that sort of everybody was gonna do their part, kind of, let's all get on board, and that's very worthy, given that the lake is something we all care about. But we just have to make sure that it's being implemented well.
and it's sort of weird that it's, the all-in has meant, at least in the residential sector, that it's not quite all, like. it's
Yeah, I mean,
Weirdly, some people are like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the way it's being defined is a little odd,
Yeah.
but I mean, there are lots of towns are supposed to be doing things, farms are supposed to be doing, every, there are cities the city of Burlington has put a ton of money into trying to do it, so like there are multiple actors, it's just playing out in this instance in a really weird, unfortunate way.
Well, thank you, and also, Ms. Cleta, I wanna make sure to say, all those resources that you showed us, were great, and as long as you're, willing, if you wouldn't mind forwarding them on to our committee assistant, so that we can post them, as a part of your testimony, and then same with, other folks, if you could, submit your testimony, that would be great. And we do have, Ms. Conrad too, as well, so, yes, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. For the record, Amy Snre, and I'm testifying as a private citizen on behalf of my neighborhood in South Burlington. And I'll just start off by saying that this has been really cathartic, listening to this and listening to other folks testify about how they are trying to comply with this law, but the implementation of it just makes it incredibly difficult for a number of us to do so. And the fact that the legislature is recognizing that perhaps the law itself needs to be amended is really helpful to know. So with that, I will just start out by saying that my neighborhood is supportive of H4.
Can I interrupt you real quick? I'm sorry. We're having kind of a hard time hearing you. I wonder if you could like get closer to your computer maybe? Okay, answer that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I think so.
All right. Let me know
Okay.
if you need a yell. I'll do that.
Okay, if it continues to be a problem, we'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So my neighborhood is supportive of H481 as long as it contains mechanisms to ensure that individual developments or neighborhoods are able to come into compliance with the stormwater management regulations set forth, and that the amendments that you're looking at address some of the operational, legal, equity, and affordability challenges that we've been confronting as a neighborhood in trying to come into compliance with this. So a little bit of background. We had 32 households in our development, which is Oak Brook Pines. It was developed in 1980. 32 residential units received individual letters in the spring of 2024, notifying us that we are in a development with impervious surfaces of less than 3 acres that were not previously subject to a stormwater permit designed to pre-2002 standards, but we're discharging into a stormwater impaired waterway, which in our case is the Potash Brook, and thus we are out of compliance with the stormwater regulations and that our continued non-compliance could lead to fines or platted titles for our properties. So even though we're in a development of 2.91 acres, just under 3 acres, it seems to us, are still subject to the 3-acre rule due to our proximity to the Potash Brook. Our development includes properties with relatively small lots, 2/10 to 3/10 of an acre each. And we are not part of a collective legal entity such as a homeowners association. The letter that we got from DEC didn't provide necessarily concrete deadlines for action that need to be taken, other than saying that we need to take action ASAP. Nor did it provide property owners with detailed guidance other than to form a homeowners association and apply for stormwater permit coverage through a pretty detailed application process. After that, through a round of door knocking and email exchanges that we had as a neighborhood, we collectively decided to meet with the City of South Burlington's stormwater manager, who very helpfully provided us with more information and some options, but they acknowledged that this is a set of regulations that is within the purview of the state, not the City of South Burlington. So, you know, a lot of what they could offer us was limited because this isn't part of their jurisdiction. At that time that we met with those staff, they laid out 3 options for our 32 households, and all of these first required forming an HOA. So the 3 options were, we would work with the city to form a stormwater only HOA. The city would hire an engineer to complete the feasibility assessment and obtain the general stormwater permit. The city would look for and apply for grant funding for construction. And then there would be a cost share based on city versus residential impervious surfaces, the ratio of that in our neighborhood. That was option 1. Option 2 was that our lots basically could work directly with the state to form a homeowners association. And then we would on our own hire an engineer and obtain a stormwater permit. And we would on our own look for and apply for grant funding for construction of any stormwater infrastructure that was deemed necessary by the feasibility assessment. That was option 2. Option 3 was that we would do nothing and apply for coverage under the City of South Burlington's MS4 permit. We would have to form a stormwater only HOA again, apply for coverage under the city's MS4 permit, pay a stormwater impact fee of $3,631.25 per residence, and that the city would then retain the option to manage, fund, construct stormwater projects within our neighborhood if that's deemed feasible. All 3 of these options from our neighborhood's collective perspective present legal, operational, equity, and affordability challenges for us. Legally, I would just start out by saying that the difficulty of obtaining unanimous consensus for 32 households to form an HOA where none previously existed, especially given that a number of these households are short-term rentals, cannot be overstated. That this was the first step for every option laid out to us was a non-starter for some of our neighbors, and other neighbors feared that the neighbors who acted in good faith to form an HOA would end up shouldering the burden of paying the dues of the neighbors who ignored the regulations and decided not to engage in the process at all. We need a mechanism as a development subject to these regulations to comply as individual households without having to form an HOA. Asking individual households with old or expired permits to each shoulder the burden of getting into permit compliance is not, from our perspective, reasonable. And any new legislation needs to find a more holistic approach, or one that leverages municipal systems such as the City of South Burlington's MS4 permit where they exist. Further, our neighborhood itself is pretty tiny, and it doesn't have the space to develop any real plans for infrastructure that would support better stormwater management. So asking us to form an HOA on our own and then hiring an engineer on our own to conduct a feasibility assessment that would then say there's not a whole lot that can be done meaningfully here does not seem like it would be an efficient use of resources given the cost of an engineer. Secondly, in terms of equity issues, I think other folks who have given testimony have also said similar things, that we're surrounded by neighbors in the same neighborhood who aren't subject to these stormwater regulations and who aren't deemed out of compliance with this, either because they have houses that were built before a certain time, so they were kind of grandfathered out of this requirement, or because they're not located in a stormwater impaired waterway. That only some of us are being subject to these stormwater regulations doesn't, from our perspective, seem equitable, given that we all live in close proximity to each other, and water goes where it goes, and it doesn't care about property boundaries or parcel boundaries or development boundaries. This is a statewide problem, as others have said, and we think it should have statewide solutions rather than creating unnecessary burden for a small proportion of households or unnecessary sources of tension between neighbors. Further, this also raises affordability concerns. Of the options laid out before us by the city of South Burlington, 2 of them had unknown costs. We don't know how much money it would cost our 32 households to hire an engineer, conduct a feasibility assessment, and construct any necessary stormwater infrastructure, either with or without the city's assistance. Further, we were then also told that because we are in an under 3-acre site, we are not eligible for most of the grant funding that was set aside to help defray costs. I think someone referenced ARPA dollars being made available to help with this. It was our understanding that that was only for sites of 3 acres or more. That the city of South Burlington offered to fold our development into their own MS4 permit at a cost of $3,600-ish per household was very, very generous, but it was also a pretty bitter pill to swallow, especially for households like mine, who are new homeowners in a pretty tough economy, or for a lot of the folks in my neighborhood who are on fixed incomes as well. Allowing the city to incorporate this fee into our stormwater utility bills, for example, would ensure that all households are subject to the regulations, are obligated to pay their share in an equitable manner. And it could also allow us more flexibility in paying our fees over time rather than upfront. And it's my understanding that some of these amendments would allow us to be able to pay for this through our stormwater utility bills without having to form an HOA.
I apologize for interrupting. How much more do you have to go? And I apologize, by virtue of going last, we're running up against our deadlines.
No, that's totally fine. No, I'll conclude and I'll just say that we believe in the importance of Vermont's, waterways being healthy, and that we think the goals of the Clean Water Act are really laudable. We just don't see how the current regulations set us up for success. Because we don't have an HOA, it makes it difficult for us to be brought into compliance. And I would just hope that any improvements that could be made through legislation would help developments like ours that don't have an HOA, that are pretty small, but also that we can engage with our municipality that does have an MS4 permit that we could be folded into. So there is a pathway, we think, for us to be able to come into compliance, but amendments to the law are needed so that we could do that without having to form an HOA.
Yeah.
And that is it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that point, and it's I think it's an important one. So thank you. And really appreciate your testimony. And if you would also submit your testimony, if you have it in writing, we would love to take that as well. And I have a couple of questions for you, but I may follow up by email.